and welcome to the Code Clarity podcast. I'm Jean.
And I'm Rena. And today we're going to be talking about email consent.
Brilliant. So let's think about the big questions around this. So I'm thinking of the why, what, how, when questions. So starting off, Rena, why? Why do we need to get email consent?
Okay, so if we look at the reasons why we are doing this, it goes back to what the code says, and the ABPI code in the UK requires that when we are promoting through a number of different ways of digital communication, but interestingly, that includes things like telephone and text, we must have the prior permission of the recipient. So that's the reason that we do it. It's because it's a very strong and very clear code requirement.
Okay, great. So that's clear. Who do we need to get the consent from?
Well, because consent's only required for promotion, it therefore follows that whoever's eligible to get promotion from us is who we need to get consent from. So ordinarily speaking, that will be healthcare professionals, but also other relevant decision makers. If we are sitting wondering about getting consent for promotional email to a member of the public, then we should obviously have lots of flags and lots of alarm bells going off.
There's a bigger issue going on
there.
Issue, yeah. Okay, great. So so we know why we need to get consent. We know who we need to get consent from, but who gets that consent from companies? Is there any considerations around that? Is it just the sales team? Could medical get consent? Who's getting this consent?
Well, this is really interesting, actually, because when you talk to companies, some companies are almost a little bit horrified that we would consider using non-promotional staff like your MSLs to go and get consent. But gaining consent is not a promotional activity. So it therefore follows you can use anybody you like. You can use head office, you can use a telesales contract agency, you can use the CAMs, you can use MSLs as well, as long as what the MSLs don't do in that whole exercise is, of course, go off and promote, which they're not going to. So anyone.
Okay, and then this I've thought of a question here, but I think it's going to be you're going to answer it. If we what does that consent look like?
Yeah, so there's all sorts of kind of interpretations of what prior permission looks like. Some people think it means explicit, written, in blood, etc., two-way. It almost turns into a bit of a contract, but actually PMCPA guidance, and this is old digital guidance, but it still applies. They said in there that the consent must be fully informed, which of course, I mean, it's just spelling out what we already know about consent, but they also said that the recipient must actively have given that consent. So that kind of tells us it's opt-in, it's not an opt-out sort of thing. But there is a case ruling for NAP where in that ruling, the PMCPA said that permission could not be given by a third party on the recipient's behalf. So we have all sorts of questions that come up like, okay, the HCP can give their explicit consent. What if the HCP gives their consent via a centralized departmental inbox? Is that okay? Is it okay for all the HCPs to go, yeah, we all give our consent that way? I don't know. What do you think?
So I would say that it's about explicit, specific consent by that individual. So I think you have to have some way of the individual has to actively opt in, because you said it has to be an active opt-in. So if it's going to, if it's going to a department inbox, then I think you probably do need to make sure that everybody who's got access to that inbox has actively opted in to receive that promotional content.
Okay, I agree with you there. Now, let's think about tweaking that scenario. So let's say a consultant has a secretary and the secretary deals with all the emails and the secretary says, yeah, he or she will give their permission. Is that okay? Or how could we make that okay?
I would say in that case, you need to do, because it has to be actively from the individual. So there's probably more than one solution to this. A suggestion I would say would be you would send an email to the consultant saying, thank you very much. I understand from your secretary that you've given permission for me to send you promotional emails. Please confirm by clicking here, replying with a yes. make it easy, but they've got to actively do something for that confirmation. So you have got proof that they have actively opted in.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've seen a range of different things, and as you've just mentioned, there's people are doing different things. So we've seen the reply to this email, which I think is actually, it's a lot of work for an HCP. They've given permission, they've done it through their assistant. You know, do they really need to reply? But I think the voting button, you know, we're all very good at using voting buttons. That's super easy. Let's think about them. Do you think it would be okay to have a one-way communication saying, by accepting this email, maybe with a read receipt, you have given your permission?
I personally would say no, because the read receipt, they could read it, it doesn't mean to say they've accepted it. And I think there's, you know, there are lots of cases where they've said you need to prove that they've actively opted in. And, you know, coming back to your earlier point, that it has to be explicit. Just saying you might receive promotional information or you might receive information isn't enough. The panel is very particular to make sure that it's spelled out. You are going to receive promotional information from a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, there is a bigger thing, which is not about the code, which is human nature. And there is a case, I think it was Boehringer, it's a very, very old case, where the HCP, the healthcare professional, has forgotten they're given permission. So, of course, if it's a one-way comms, you're way more likely to forget. If you actively ask them to press a button, there's a little bit more chance of they remembering doing this, and that will save them a complaint, right? So, okay, I think we're agreed on those.
Okay, excellent. So I think we've done why, who, what, how. I think we've covered how as well. Anything else under how you do it? We've covered that.
No, I don't think so. I think the only other thing I think is important is understanding timelines. So there was a case ruling, for example, if you're a CAM and you've asked a HCP for consent and they say no, can you go in every week and keep asking them? Of course. And we're going, no, of course you can't do that. But if you are going to tell them to revisit, what's a sensible timeline for that? What would you say?
Well, I think it comes back to your question again about human nature and not annoying people. And although technically, if you're having face-to-face meetings, there's nothing to prevent you continually asking them for permission. But you've got to think, is that really going to help you? If they've said no, then I mean, so I think that to me would be judging on the individual relationship. Do you check every couple, do you check twice a year? Do you still don't want to receive any emails? Or do you just go, actually, that's a hard no there. We're gonna
but it's good, right, for companies to turn the grey of the code, because this is the grey, right? Don't cause offence is grey, because one person's offence is someone's completely normal standards. So this is where the SOP kicks in. Your SOP should really say, if you're going to re-ask, then leave it 6 months and document that in the CRM system.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, thanks for that, Rena. That was really, really helpful. So we know why we have to ask permission, who we have to ask permission from, the fact that anybody can ask for permission, and what that permission looks like. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.